Good morning, welcome to Headline Focus here live on Core Politics with me, Rob Double. It is Monday, the 13th of August 2018. Let's have a look at what's making the political headlines as we still are in recess and nearly halfway through. And so what you would expect at this time is for not much really to be going on in the news, a lot of silly stories and silly season coming out. Actually, that's not really the case this year. It's been a bit of an anomaly. To start off with, we are, of course, talking about Brexit, as this period for the government is very important in terms of the October summit and getting an agreement in place with the EU, but also in the domestic front as well. Not great news for Theresa May, though, from the Times today. This is their splash. Tariffs plan a fantasy, says experts. Now, Theresa May's plan for a bespoke customs deal with the European Union is based on flawed analysis and described by trade experts last night as fanciful. Now, that is, according to this report, it's relating to the central pledges which are around the majority of businesses not having to pay the right or no tariff at the border, so not having to pay a tariff basically, or paying the right tariff at a border, the vast majority of businesses, and this is specifically relating to the border between the UK and the EU, which would be the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. And secondly, the assumption that businesses will be able to reliably track goods to their final destination. Now, that is a particularly important point for the EU, but also the UK, because it deals with smuggling. And the concern is that if you have more lax rules in terms of tracking goods, or no kind of physical infrastructure in place to track goods along that border, you'll get problems of smuggling, because people will be able to get goods through that border more easily, perhaps, than in other entry points. This, of course, relates to Theresa May's facilitated customs arrangement proposal, which was outlined in the Chequers plan. The idea that the government would be able to track goods to their final destination if they come through Northern Ireland and that border, and therefore would be able to properly pass on tariffs to the EU if the goods are simply passing through the UK into the EU, or if they're not, if they're staying in the UK mainland, or rather the UK as a whole, they'd be able to charge them the UK tariffs, which could be different to the EU tariffs, because the UK would be able to set their own independent customs policy, being out of the customs union. Now, while this is, again, some might say Project Fear, this is the classic, perhaps, expert view, very hostile to the idea of Brexit and the disruption it may cause. At the same time, even people like Jacob Rees-Mogg underpin this concern with the Chequers plan, particularly over this facilitated customs arrangement. Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, one of the leading Brexiteers, chair of the European Research Group, which is the very Eurosceptic research group, which is lobbying for a more comprehensive Brexit, a more Brexit with someone like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson would have gone for. The concerns over the complexity of this plan and the practicality of this plan, the complexity of this tariffs collection, tariffs tracking, goods tracking system, but also the practicality for businesses. You know, will the government claim something like 90-something percent, 96%, I think it is, of goods will be able to be tracked to their final destination? Is that practical? Is that reasonable? And is that going to be in place realistically by the time the UK leaves the EU March 2019, or after the transition period, just over, a year and a half after that? That's the key point, and that's why this will be getting a little bit of traction over the next few days, no doubt, and underpins the concern for a lot of people with the Chequers deal, both from the Remain and the Leave side of the camp. Next up, though, the real theme which is coming through in recess, this seems to be the real pillar of the stories, is the recess racism rows which are happening both in the Conservative and the Labour Party. Now, just to go through them, the Labour is the anti-Semitism story, which is continuously hitting the Labour leadership at the moment. The stories are not going away. The concerns are basically the anti-Semitism which exists within the Labour Party, the apparent increase in anti-Semitism cases which are in the Labour Party now, and also, secondly, the handling of cases of anti-Semitism or reported and alleged anti-Semitism by the Labour leadership, and concerns over the history and the dealing with anti-Semitism with individuals within the Labour leadership as well, all the concerns and allegations which stem from that. Now, this continues with the Mail story, as you can see from here, their front page. They're continuing on their coverage, they were doing this over the weekend as well, of the attendance by Jeremy Corbyn, Labour leader, at the Palestinian Memorial Service in 2014. Now, they claimed on Saturday that among those being honoured at this event, which Jeremy Corbyn, they report, attended, were suspects in the Black September massacre of Israeli athletes in 1972. They're following up today with hard-hitting comments from some of the widows of the murdered athletes as well. as you can see there. The Labour Party, Labour leadership released a statement. They insist the story is nonsense, saying that Jeremy Corbyn was attending a ceremony for Palestinian Liberation Organisation leaders killed in an airstrike in 1985. The Conservatives, though, are picking up on this story. Sajid Javid have actually reportedly called for Jeremy Corbyn to actually resign over this. But the second wave of this is the Morning Star article, which has been dragged out, which reportedly suggests otherwise in terms of what Jeremy Corbyn's motives were for being there, particularly in terms of the individuals who are being remembered at the event. So a lot of different elements going on there. I do not expect this story to particularly be going away, mainly because there seems to be no resolution or backing down from either parties in terms of who was in the wrong, what actually happened, and is there going to be an apology issued? Is there going to be some action taken? But the wider theme here is the anti-Semitism within the Labour Party concern, and that seems also not to be going away. Check out our latest Meet the MPs as well with Ruth Smeeth. Really interesting stuff she said about anti-Semitism within the Labour Party in terms of how she's been dealt with and how she feels about the issue. That's on our channel. Just check out on our videos. The second wave of this is, of course, what's going on in the Conservative Party around Boris Johnson and the allegations of Islamophobia from his article from last week. Now, The Guardian reporting today that the Muslim Council of Britain, which represents some Muslim groups within the UK, will write to the Prime Minister, Theresa May, this morning, demanding a full disciplinary inquiry into Boris Johnson. This, of course, puts more pressure on the Tory Party chairman, Brandon Lewis, not to let any inquiry into Boris slide, to make a point of the Conservative Party being very hot on any issues of racism or anti-Semitism or Islamophobia within the party, or anything relating to those kind of issues. The trouble, though, is that there's a huge amount of anger brewing from Tory Party, some Conservative MPs, and also grassroots of the Conservative Party over the way Boris Johnson is being dealt, because it's being dragged into the whole idea of, in a liberal democracy, in a liberal society, what can people say, and can people have the right to offend people if they're simply saying their opinion on an issue. But the Muslim Council of Britain letter, according to The Guardian, says, "We are hopeful that the party will not allow any whitewashing of this specific inquiry currently in process. No one should be allowed to victimise minorities with impunity." So do not expect that story to go away. Either, no doubt more lines on that as that letter is hits the news a little bit later on. Finally, one more story then comes again from Brexit. This one more EU side, relating to Peak-Barnier, the EU's chief negotiator. Now, is his role shrinking within these Brexit negotiations? Over the past, 2 years, he's been the central figure, dealing with David Davis, dealing with Dominic Raab, and dealing with Theresa May as well. He's had a relatively good run from an EU perspective in that his very much firm manner and really strong work ethic in terms of crossing the European continents to meet leaders and his reportedly very good team has meant that, to some extent, the EU has, in terms of shaping the narrative and the PR exercise at least, been on the front foot in terms of really putting pressure on the UK to come up with some solutions, and also then being very hardline in terms of the EU red lines and not wanting to compromise in any way the principles of the EU. However, what's going to happen now as it really comes to crunch and the reality of Brexit happens in terms of not only what's going to happen to the EU, but also the EU 27 and the disruptions that will happen in each individual country as a result of Brexit, we are seeing perhaps more EU 27 leaders wanting to assert themselves and get involved in the Brexit negotiations, and perhaps not always go along with the European Commission line, but in fact going along for what is best for me as the leader of this country and the impacts it will have if we continue to follow the EU Commission's line, hard lines on things, and the possibility of a no-deal Brexit and the implications of that. What we've been reporting on for a while here, and what seems to be the case now, is that as the realities and the real deadlines start coming along, more leaders are wanting to say, hang on a minute, I want to have a say on this. I'm not prepared to let this domestic impact happen in my country because of a no-deal Brexit, because of the negotiating positions of the EU as well as the UK. I'm going to get involved, and perhaps we'll see now some EU concessions or some EU red lines starting to be blurred. Now, that could be towards the backstop with the UK and Northern Ireland, and with the issue of Ireland altogether, and other issues such as European Court of Justice, in the hope that any impact on GDP, national deficits or employment or movement of people to the UK will be mitigated. Really interesting theme there. No doubt we'll see that coming through in the next few weeks as well, something definitely to keep an eye on. Right, that's pretty much it for this week. We're not going to be bringing you any more this week, just simply because it is recess. We'll be bringing you another headline focus next week on Monday, and as and when stories come up, we'll be bringing them to you in the mornings. But that's pretty much it for me. If you want to chat to me or any of the team here at all, just drop us a tweet or a message down below or on our Facebook page or on Twitter right there. But from me and all the team here at Core London, have a fantastic week ahead. See you in about 7 days, round about 9 o'clock.